Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the Space Shuttle Endeavour STS-134 pre-launch news conference. Joining me today is Mike Moses, Mission Management Team Chair and Manager of the Space Shuttle Launch Integration.
Good afternoon.
Mike Leinbach, Shuttle Launch Director.
Good afternoon.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good afternoon.
We'll hear from our panelists and then take questions. Mr. Moses.
Thanks, Kendra. Let's see, we had a really good meeting today, unanimous consent from the mission management team to press on with the launch countdown. Everything's in really great shape, really no issues at all working. We took our time to walk through the issue that caused the launch scrub last time, the APU-1 heater problem, to make sure we truly understood our resolution and our fix, that everybody had a chance to see that. And some of our independent teams that haven't been paying attention to the nitty-gritty details as we've been going through them down here. And everybody was fine with that. So to give you the Reader's Digest version, on launch day, we had a heater in the APU system not working, the auxiliary power unit system, one of two redundant heaters, and the rules require us to have both operational before we can fly. Worries about freezing concerns once you get in orbit. So we scrubbed and went in and started our troubleshooting and found that those heaters weren't getting power. They weren't getting power because one of the power distribution boxes had a fuse inside it blown. That blown fuse was caused by an external short, external to that box. And through some really good data investigation, the teams found that the cause of that short actually occurred back in June when we were in the OPF, the Orbital Processing Facility, doing some testing on that circuit. We had either come in contact with a connector on the thermostat that was already had bare metal on it, or the testing itself caused that inadvertent contact and created the bare metal short. But basically, we found bare metal exposed wiring over a very small area, but enough that it was in a locale that could have caused the short. We knew we were working on the circuit at the time that the short showed up in our data, so really conclusive proof that was the cause and that was the problem. Even if we were wrong, the troubleshooting we did, because we hadn't found that smoking gun until the end of the line, we had already replaced a bunch of wiring, replaced a bunch of parts. Some of that had to be done just because the fuse in the aft load control assembly box had blown, and we needed to pull that box out. So we had to do that work anyway, but we went ahead and did some extra work just to be ultra conservative, and when we were doing it, we didn't quite know cause. Now we know cause. We can look back and say some of that work wasn't required, but it does give us further protection in case we are wrong, that tiny little chance that there was some other smart problem happening at the same time. And so really high confidence. The teams did an amazing job. You look at some of the stuff, they're taking this thermostat that's got a nickel wire running to it, a conductor wire, or it's actually a copper wire with nickel coating on it. They're able to go with a scanning electron microscope and zoom down and find that there's tooling marks where the metal was scraped. You can see melted insulation from the heat of the event. The only piece that's missing is the molten metal that you would see as an arc jumped from the bare wire to whatever ground plane it had. But we were actually at the time heating this thermostat up with a heat gun that has a metal tip on it. If we inadvertently managed to touch that metal tip to the wire, it would have melted directly through the insulator, come in direct contact with the wire, and shorted without an arc jumping the gap. So we postulate that's what happened. And again, you could be a lawyer to say that we haven't exactly proven that was exactly it, but in our minds we are good to go, and we have no problems expected with this APU heater anymore in this count. So the teams got that all done. Like I said, it required some pretty extensive retest and rework. We did all that work. Nothing else really happened to us while we were down. We had to change out a few batteries here and there, and then do the standard freshening up of the stuff in the crew cabin and reload payloads and experiments in the crew cabin. Other than that, everything was great. We didn't talk much today. Looking ahead to launch countdown, the system looks good, the weather looks pretty good, and we should be in real good shape for launch on Monday morning. And with that, turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We'll see the countdown for Endeavour's final mission is going extremely well. We got the cryogenic fuels on board for the fuel cell system today. Don't have the final numbers yet, but I expect we'll have a good full 7 days plus hold time on fuel cell cryos. So no issue there. Next major milestone is RSS retract tomorrow afternoon at noon time, and we'll take a good hard look at the weather before we do that. We have lightning commit criteria for that, and we'll take a look and make sure that we're well within those criteria before we rotate the RSS. Tanking for launch begins just before midnight tomorrow night, standard 3-hour tanking, and it leads up to the opening of the launch window Monday morning at 8:56 Eastern Time. we're not working any issues in the launch countdown. The team is ready to go, and hope to have a good liftoff Monday morning from Mark Kelly and his crew. Thanks.
And for weather, we do have a lot of weather in the area right now. In fact, if you were in this room with us like we are, you can hear the thunder rumbling overhead. We've had some thunderstorms roll in from the west. We also issued some wind warnings and lightning warnings, as well as a hail warning. And that was mainly due to the fact we saw these thunderstorms coming across as we expected, and we had a sea breeze sitting over the coast here. And so we expected weather to converge overhead, which it has. There's also a couple more waves that are coming because of a trough that's moving in from the west. So we expect some more weather throughout the afternoon and into the evening. Now, the good news is by tomorrow, the weather should all be pushing out gradually, and so by RSS retract time, the weather is going to be improving. So, and as we go through the day tomorrow, it'll be improving. So for RSS retract, weather's looking promising. Also, as we get into tanking, and then by launch time, our main concern is going to be crosswinds at the shuttle landing facility, and there's a slight chance of a low cloud ceiling as well. So right now, we're forecasting a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Looking at the satellite picture, you can see that we do have a lot of weather that's rolling through Florida right now with the trough. What's going on is there's an upper level low up to the north, and with that, there's some surface troughs that generally work like bicycle spokes going around the low coming through Florida. So we expect a couple waves today, and the big one really coming through this evening in the overnight hours, pushing out by RSS retract time. Now, as we go into tanking, weather will be improving and good, and then by launch time, again, favorable. So again, 30% chance for KSC weather prohibiting launch. Now, if we happen to delay 24 hours, our main concern will just be another trough rolling through. And so we actually are more concerned on Tuesday about crosswinds, low cloud ceilings, and showers within 20 nautical miles. So with that, we've increased the number on Tuesday to a 60% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. By Wednesday, it looks like a lot of the moisture is going to be pushed off to the east. We do still have some crosswind concerns, though, so just a 20% chance, though, on Wednesday for KSC weather prohibiting launch. As for the TAL sites, the weather looks good at 2 TAL sites on launch day. So overall, it's looking promising for launch with, again, a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch.
Thank you. We'll now hear from our panelists. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, your affiliation, and to whom you're addressing the questions. We'll start over here with Marcia, please.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. Do either of you gentlemen have any new crowd count coming, any estimate? And given the poor forecast on Tuesday morning, would you be inclined, because of crowds and bad weather, to just skip from Monday to Wednesday for a second attempt if you need it?
See, we did check with our NASA security folks who are in contact with all the local police departments and the State Highway Patrol. The estimate now is about 500,000 people, and you'll recall for the first launch attempt on that Friday afternoon, the estimate was between 500 and 750,000. So they're not quite expecting that big surge tomorrow, but still be a heck of a traffic jam tomorrow after launch. And you know, as Mike and I have talked before about the 24 versus 48, it's really going to be dependent on the day. The traffic will play into it a little bit. The weather obviously plays into it the next day. So a number of factors goes into the scrub turnaround decision. So can't commit right now one way or the other.
Okay, Clara.
Hi, Clara Moskowitz with Space.com, and I'm just wondering if there's a point in the countdown that you'll know for sure that the heater issue is no longer a problem?
Let's see. So after the tanks are, the ET's loaded, we cycle those on with ground commands. Normally just the B heaters are used pre-launch, and then they're deactivated right before liftoff, and then the crew will turn them on manually once they get in orbit. This time we're going to go ahead and check the A and the B just to double check. As part of the troubleshooting, we kind of have run functionals on all those thermostats. We know they work. We know the heaters work. We know all the wiring works. The only thing we haven't done is check it at the environment that it would see on launch day, and so it's worth one more check there just to make sure too. But we're not really doing it based on the cause we now know. There's really no need for that check, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway.
And that'll be after we're in stable replenish, after all the cryos are on board the tank. So somewhere between 2:30 and 5 or Monday morning, something like that.
Todd.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today with one and a follow, if I could. First for Kathy, could you remind me of the lightning criteria for RSS rollback, please?
Sure. We can't have more than a 20% chance of lightning within 5 for RSS retract.
Okay. And for Mike Leinbach, you're going to be going into a firing room where, you know, a number of people this week received warn notices, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are with going into a countdown with layoff notices going out to the workforce?
Well, you know, Todd, we've known this has been coming for quite some time. The timing is probably not ideal, as you point out. The team is extremely professional, and so the mood, you know, as we've talked about before, the mood is a little bit downcast right now. When you get off console and you're talking to your friends in the hallway, that's when you talk about things like this. But when we're on console, doing our job, looking at our data, I have no worries at all about the team and being able to make the right calls on Monday, really throughout the whole remaining of the countdown. So timing's a little unfortunate, yes, but we've all known it's been coming, and now people can definitely plan their futures, knowing which way they're going to be going.
Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS. Two quick questions for Mike Moses. Just a chronology question on the presumed short. That was in June of last year when the spike occurred, I guess, that was in the data. And that system that ran through ALCA2, that circuit card or hybrid driver, I guess, that never got powered until you're into fueling and launch count. So, I mean, whatever happened back in June was simply undetected until you guys started trying to cycle thermostats when the aft got cold.
Yeah, you got it exactly right.
Okay.
And the way it works is, you know, we have a bunch of heaters on the ship, and to go in and test them on the ground, you'd have to basically go physically to each thermostat and cool it down with some cool mist to make it colder in there than the ambient. So in space, that heater doesn't kick on at the temperatures that we are down here on the ground. And so you'd have to go physically to every single heater in the aft compartment, and traffic-wise, that would take a lot of, you're likely to cause a lot of collateral damage trying to go verify functionality of every single thermostat in the ship. So we use our on-orbit time frame to check out the heaters. In the flight plan, we do it for heaters and regulators, other things that are hard to check if you're not really going to flow the system, like in the OMS RCS system. To check that a regulator is working, you have to go flow propellant through it. You really don't want to do that in the OPF if you don't have to. So on orbit, we split the mission in half, and for the first half of the mission, we check out the A side of the system, and then we switch everything over. On the second half of orbit, we're checking out the B side. So we verify functionality and operation in orbit, but the overtemp thermostats don't get checked out in orbit, and so obviously unless a heater's failed and running away, that overtemp's not going to work. So on an interval, in this case I think it was a 4-year interval, that was due to come in and physically check functionality of the overtemp. And if you look at it from a process standpoint at the high level, that's a little bit of an oversight, right? We verify that the heater works when it was in orbit, and then we come back in and verify that it now doesn't work like it's supposed to. And we had the magic bullet happen is in the testing to make sure it didn't work, we broke it. And we didn't know that we broke it. We thought it was not working because it was supposed to not work. And then we didn't go back and re-verify functionality after we did the non-functional check. So you kind of go through that and you say, well, that's in hindsight a pretty obvious thing. But it's a good example of the level of thought processes that both in 30 years of flying the shuttle, you can have something like this kind of creep through, and in flying a shuttle that you recognize how thorough we really do need to be to verify, you know, something like a heater, and when you check it and what you do in that system right after that is actually pretty important. When we were talking about all these retests we do it because the bent pin analysis that we do shows that in any given connector, you want to make sure that if one connector pin bends and touches another connector pin right next to it, that those two functions that short together aren't some critical system that would then cause loss of crew or vehicle. So, I mean, the amount of redundancy and analysis that's put into the retest when we break apart a system to verify that we put it back together properly is, again, a great example of how thorough we are. This one's one of those that we probably weren't quite as thorough as we should have been, but when you're thinking about it from a heater functionality standpoint, who would have thought that would have been something you really needed to go double check? So we learned a lesson, and hopefully on the next shuttle we'll design a little better test.
Sure, we'll all go off and try to get all that detail in our story. So
yeah, I'm sure.
I'm kidding. The other question I had too is in the aft when you fuel, and maybe Mike Leinbach knows better. What is ambient in the aft when you tank's full and you're flowing? I'm just trying to understand the temperature that would cause the thermostats to start cycling.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know what the actual temperature is, but we called this thing failed when it dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So
It's not as cold in the aft as you might imagine. It's probably in the 40s, something like that.
Okay. Irene.
Irene Klautz with Reuters. I just had one follow-up, Mike Moses, for the scenario you just laid out. Is this kind of a moot point, though? Is there any, is the Atlantis heaters not scheduled for this 4-year check?
Well, it is a good example of again, on the thoroughness. So when we recognized that this could have been a problem that we caused by testing that we didn't recognize we caused, we went back and looked everywhere else on this ship and on Atlantis where we've done over-temp thermostat checks to verify that we didn't have any unexpected current spikes in there that represented a loss of function. So yeah, we did go and check both the remainder of the heaters on this vehicle and on Atlantis to make sure, in a data standpoint, reviewing the data to make sure we didn't cause any problems when we were doing any of those checkouts. I don't recall specifically if we were doing any of this testing on Atlantis. Given the interval nature of this test, I doubt that Atlantis had this specific test performed on it. But yeah, so it was relevant in that we did our normal due diligence to check the rest of the fleet.
Thanks. And I have two other questions. One is on the 135 mission, I know you've scheduled rollover since we spoke with you last. Is there any further refinement on what the target launch date would be for that?
Let's see, Mike, you guys are still planning rollover on the 17th?
17th. We'll roll over on the 17th, roll over from the OPF to the VAB on the 17th. We'll spend the night in the transfer aisle on the 17th and then go from mate to the external tank on the 18th and out to the pad the evening of the 31st of May. 2000 first motion and hard down at the pad about 4 a.m. on June the 1st.
And so what remains to still be decided is once we're out at the pad, that's a pretty fixed schedule based on when 134 launches, how fast the pad can be turned around and ready to receive Atlantis and the stack. So that's when June 1st comes in to say that's when 31st, June 1st, you're ready to be at the pad. Then we have the work at the pad, how many contingency days we protect, and what order we want to do them in. That's what we're still kind of working through right now, which will ultimately set what the launch date needs to be. So we've narrowed down to within a week and a half window, and now we just got to figure out exactly what that date needs to be.
What's the window now?
Or still the same thing I told you last time, which is around the second week in June, or July. I keep saying June. Second week in July.
Thanks. And I just had another question, too, about the lightning. If there is a lightning strike within a half mile, I guess, from the pad when the sensors are activated, what does that mean? Like when you're in the countdown, I mean, would things stop, and would there be a retest of various systems, or how would that kind of play out in a real-time mode?
Well, let's see, the criteria for a retest is if we get within a half a mile and we see indications that we've had induced voltage either to the stack or to the fixed service structure that would cause us to question whether we had any need for a retest. There are various systems out there that we use to see if we've had any induced voltage to the ship. That has happened before in Launch Countdown. I think you'll recall a couple of years or so ago we had a strike during the L-2, I believe it was, yes. and so we were sitting in the L-2, lightning just like today, and the phone started ringing, and so then we went into a retest on that one because that one actually had some induced voltage to the ship. So it depends on where the strike is, how intense the strike is. Kathy, you want to go through the systems that we use to detect?
Sure. We have cloud-to-ground light. We have two different cloud-to-ground lightning systems we gather data from. One is our local system, and then we have the national system as well. And so we provide data that we can actually give an ellipse, given the different sensors and how many sensors detect that particular stroke. We can give a 99% confidence ellipse that the stroke occurred within this particular area. So we'll do that after every lightning. Anytime we get lightning within 5 nautical miles, we gather the data and we send it in to the team, and then they do the analysis if necessary.
Is there anything from this afternoon?
There wasn't any. The cloud-to-ground lightning detection system gives us two pieces of information. One, well, it gives us more than that, but the main things we're looking for when it comes to the distance is the actual first guess. So there was no first guess within a half a mile within the pad perimeter. What I do need to go back to do next is get the ellipse data and see if there was any ellipses within half mile, but right now there's not an indication yet. But we like to be thorough and check all that data.
Thanks.
Mark Ratterman from Talking Space for Mike Moses. Another question on heaters and thermostats, but not troubleshooting. I understand the process that you went through. Normal operation when in orbit, do those multiple thermostats on each heater string, do they cause the heater operation to ramp up under colder and colder temperatures in the aft bay?
Yeah, correct. So it's a pretty simple circuit. There's basically a wire resistance heater. It's just a coil of wire that when you run electricity through it gets hot. There's two of them, and they're both wrapped around the pipe. So one is powered by the A circuit, one's powered by the B. And then they have a thermostat co-located in the general environment, and the exact placement of that thermostat is dictated both by the thermodynamics of where you need to be to sense it, and then some limitations just by the geometry in the ship. But so there's a sensor that's then co-located somewhere in that heater zone, and when the temperature gets cold, just like in your house, that thermostat would open up or close. It depends on how you want to look at it, which would then turn the heater on. If supply power, heat warms up, things get warm, thermostat opens back up, power gets removed. And it's just this simple logic circuit as a little bimetallic element rotates on and off and turns power on and off. The only thing that's unique about these that you don't have in your normal coffee maker heater wiring is in that same circuit there's another thermostat which is meant to say if it gets too hot, if that first thermostat fails and the heater comes on and stays on, we don't want to over temp and melt anything. So there's a thermostat directly in line with that heater, and if it gets too hot, it then turns itself off. That's the one that had the problem, the bare metal on it that we found was one of those over temp thermostats. So we have controlled thermostats and over temp thermostats.
Okay. Robert.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com with just a quick follow-up for something that Mike Leinbach said. Just to verify, given the date that you said for rollout for Atlantis, will that mean Atlantis will be rolling out to the pad at the same time Endeavour is landing, given Endeavour's landing targeted for June 1st?
Yeah, it does say that. We've looked very hard at our workforce, and they're different people to take care of the landing and the rollout, just completely different work crews. And so if it does happen that way, it'll be a very, very special night. Landing, we'll be rolling out to the pad. We won't be hard down yet, and then here comes Endeavour back to KFC. So it'll be a nice night to witness and be part of.
Okay. Ken, did you have a question?
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine. I want to follow up on something from STS-135 you mentioned at the last briefing. You said you're going to do a tanking test, I believe, for that mission. But why we did not need to do one for this mission?
Sure, Ken. So if we go back to the previous slide, STS-133, and that was ET-137, that tank had the cracked stringer that we found when we were loading for launch. We went off in the investigation and found that we had a problem with the metal. Basically, the fracture toughness was lower than it needed to be, and then with the stack up of assembly stresses and other events caused that crack. So we went off and looked, and we knew that ET-137 and ET-138 both had similar metal that was of that same lot, and therefore had the chance to have a problem. So we went ahead and modified both those tanks. So ET-138 is flying on STS-135, so it's flying on the Atlantis mission. This tank on Endeavour's mission, ET-122, was manufactured about 10 years before that. It was taken kind of out of sequence because it had gotten damaged from Hurricane Katrina, had to get some mods made to it to become a tank that was built before we did all these return-to-flight mods. We call those inline tanks that have been flying. The ones we've been flying recently have all these design changes put on from the beginning. So this one kind of had to be retrofitted. So we didn't have the same metal on this tank as we had on the other tanks, so we don't need to test this one for cracks to make sure that the metal is not anywhere we don't want it to be, because we know that was not in that batch, and we have pretty conclusive proof of that. We were able to we went ahead and modified the tank anyway because we hadn't yet proved that to ourselves. And when we did that mod, we captured enough samples to go test and prove that, yep, that was actually good metal, and we did not really need to do that mod. It's kind of an overkill Band-Aid, but it did let us take the tanking test off the plate for this mission. So
it's because you did the modification, that's why.
Well, no, we've done the modification to all tanks. So all ET-137, ET-122, and ET-138, all three will have the modification. It was that this one's made of a different lot of metal, which is why we didn't need to test it.
Marcia, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Kathy. What is the long-range forecast beyond Wednesday? Just curious.
The weather looks good through the end of the weekend. As we get into next weekend, another front comes into the area, and so we'd start having problems again with the weather next weekend.
That's only relevant for our golf games, not for
Right.
lunch. We're not gonna we're launching Monday.
Todd.
Yeah, thanks, Todd Halverson of Florida Today for either Mike. Given this is Endeavour's last flight, I'm wondering if you guys have any favorite Endeavour memory or mission.
Go ahead.
Well, let's see. For me, Endeavour is special because the Endeavour was the vehicle we had for my first lead flight director job, STS-123. Working with that crew in this mission, it was the first time I got to to follow a little more thoroughly how the orbiter was processed through. Normally when you're working mission control back in Houston, you're coming in more on the crew timeline, and the orbiter's the orbiter, and it's the vehicle you're flying on, but how it got processed and where it is in its flow you don't really pay attention to. So Endeavour was the first one where I started getting the updates from the Cape as to what was going on down in the OPF, when it was rolling out, came down to watch roll out. So that was the first one I got to kind of follow along from how an orbiter actually gets from landing back to launch again. And so that'll always be special to me that Endeavour was the first one I got to do that with.
Well, and for me, I think I've talked about this before. Probably the first flow of Endeavour will always be with me. I was the NASA test director for that flow. We did the flight readiness firing. So the first one was special because it was a brand new vehicle. It was just as beautiful as it could possibly be. And I'll just say that last time I went out to the pad, she still looks awfully good out there. Got a lot of life left in her, but that's not to be.
Are there any other questions? Okay. That will conclude today's STS-134 pre-launch news conference. Please join us live on NASA television for our coverage of the launch, which will begin at tanking coverage, which starts at 11:30 tomorrow night. That's Eastern Time. It'll be followed by launch commentary. For more information on the STS-134 mission and crew, visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you.